Hi and welcome to Matchmove for Production by VFX Tutors. I'm Josh and in this video we'll be continuing with the Hunter project with shot H002. What we'll do first, we'll just play through the shot so we can see what we're going to track, then we'll open 3DEqualizer. So 3DEqualizer is opened. You should have a UI like this. If you don't, you can go to Environments down at the bottom left and select Basic, and this will reset your UI to this workspace. So the first thing that we need to do is load in our image sequence. So if you purchase the data package from the Gumroad store, that's great because then you can follow through with this tutorial step by step and you'll have all the necessary data to complete this shot and also some stuff to do your own personal projects with as well. If you don't and you're using your own footage, that's fine, but you may get stuck at some points if you don't have the same data as I do. So the first thing that we'll do is import our image sequence. So if we go to the top left and select our image sequence camera, then we go to live action footage on the right and select browse. Now we want to navigate to your image sequence that you're using. So in this one we're using MM024, the Hunter plate. I'll just navigate it to it. And we can see in this shot there's also a 2K resolution. So if I click OK, that will now load in my image sequence. And you can see it's dark because all these plates have been transcoded to a linear color space. So if we go over to our 8-bit color conversion, change our gamma to 2.2, that should level it out for us. So we can't really play through our timeline because it's quite laggy, so we're going to export our image cache so we can easily work in this scene. So first of all, I'll just save my scene. So 3D4, save project, and I'll just make a new directory under my file. And I'll save it the same name as the shot. So I know that this file always corresponds to this image sequence. I'll select OK. So now if we go to playback and export buffer compression file, that'll be really quick, or it depends on how quick your computer is. Then we'll select import compression file. So now if we press spacebar, we can play through our image sequence. So we can see in this shot that we're going to need to do a camera track and we're going to do an object track on the face so we can get the animation from our character's face. So what we'll do, we'll set up our lens. So if we go over to our right where it says lens here, and if you open your data package, or if you know what camera lens you got, that's fine. Here I've got I know what my camera is and my sensor size. I know what my lens is, but I don't know what my focal length is. So like all shots, I'm only going to put in my film back height and leave my width as passive because my resolution has changed and I don't know what's happened to this plate before. So I'll go to my film back height, type in 11.88 and make sure you put a millimeter, otherwise it will convert it to 11 centimeters. And I'll leave my focal length as 30mm because I don't know what it is at the moment. So if I now go over to my point groups over my left, if I open up my point group, go to 3D models, right click, add new, import OBJ file. So now if we go to our data and go to set geo, we have head, rifle and set geo. So we go to set geo, and in our set geo we have hunter set geo OBJ. And if we click OK, that will now load in our set geo for our shot. So if we press F5, we see some geos here, but we can't quite see all of it. So if we go center models, we can see it's sort of brought it a bit forward. So if we press F6 and take a look at our geometry, we can see we've got a very rough green screen area with some points that have actually been surveyed out for the lineup. And we can sort of see some very basic sort of environment geometry here, which I think this is a chair and this is the edge of the room, some plug sockets. So if we go to F5, let's try and get a rough lineup of what we have. In fact, actually let's go to F2 and we'll just look through our frame range and we'll just see which frame is going to be our best for lining up. So what we're looking for the most things that we can see to line up to. So if we line up on the first frame, we can only really line up to the green screen, which it may look fine when we line up to that, but it still may not be correct. We want to try and line up so we can see as much of the shot in depth as possible. So if we go through, we can see there's this like chair, and you can very just slightly make out that sort of alarm sensor. You can see the edge of the floor here. So I'm going to pick frame 48 for my lineup. So if I go F5 and I hold shift and left click to rotate round, and I'll use right click to zoom in, and I'll sort of use my middle mouse roller to get a very rough lineup, so I can sort of survey these points easily. So because we're at the wrong focal length, let's say we don't know what the focal length is, you're never going to get it correct. So what we're going to do a single frame lineup first. So if we go to F2, and we're just going to create single frame points on our tracking markers. So just control left click to make a new one, but don't track it, just leave as it is. We want it to do that, so go on frame 48, hold control and left click, and just do that for all the points that we want to survey. And if we get to F6, we can see our chair here. We can actually see this alarm sensor up here as well. So if we press F2, we can make out roughly where it is, and we use those as survey points as well. So now if we go to F5, if we store this pose, it means that if we completely break it or it does something weird, we can always just recall it and it will come back to this. So what I'll do, I'll just go through each of these points. I'll select extract vertex, and I'll extract the vertex onto these little discs. I'll go through one by one, selecting the extract vertex. And we can see that we've actually got a pretty good lineup on our tracking markers on our green screen. But if we look in the background, our chair and our sensor is completely off. This is why, say if we did do it on a first frame, we didn't see any of that. It would appear to be fine, but then in reality, it's actually not. It's quite far off. So if we hold shift and left click, we'll just bring everything around. And you can see that this is way off, and this is because we've got the wrong focal length. So if we select this point here, we extract the vertex, and we'll do it to the corner of this chair. And if we select this tracking point here, if we do extract polygon, we'll be able to sort of roughly place it in here. So this is only a rough lineup, so as long as we get sort of ballpark sort of line up, it should be fine for this. So now what we can we can fine tune our lens, or we can go to the where it says focal length here, and we can just click and drag, and it will give us a good inclination of what way we want to go with our focal length. So if we start going up, we can sickly say if we did 70, this is getting worse. So we can drag it down. We start off with 30. So if we keep bringing it down until it starts looking a little bit more correct. These are lining up a little bit better, and you can see how these points are actually still staying lined up. So we can sort of guess that this is probably more of an 18mm lens. So now we can fine tune this. If we go to our lens at the right, go to our focal length, change it from fixed to adjust. We go to Windows, Parameter Adjustment Window. Then we can change it to adaptive. We clear it, select adjust, and it'll start fine tuning our lineup. We just press Alt C to solve that. So we're still sticking around 18mm. So now we know it's going to be 18mm, we can bring in our 18mm lens grid. So if we go up to the top left where it says Hunter, right click on it, add new reference camera. And if we double click on our reference #2 camera, this is going to be what we're going to load our lens grid onto. So now if we go to browse, then go to your data package, select lens grid, then select your 18mm lens grid. So now that's loaded in. If we press F3, and because this has also been transcoded to a linear color space, we want to change our gamma to 2.2 in our 8-bit color conversion. So now if we go to this little grid in the middle, which is our distortion matrix, let's select the top point, click and drag until you see the zebra line, and let it snap to these corners. So you want your first 3 points to be snapped like this. Then if you click snap, it will snap all the rest into the correct place. So now we need to fill out the rest of this lens grid. So if we hold Control and press up, it will start extending the column, and hold Control down, it will start extending down. And the same with left. And so I'm holding Control on left and hold Control and press right. So now we've filled this lens grid out. We're pretty much done here. All we have to do is go to Calc, Calc Distortion and Geometry, and Calc Lens Parameters. And it's solved our distortion for this lens. And click Set Parameters and Close, and we can preview our distortion and see how much it's distorting it. So now if we double click back on our sequence camera, we can see it's transferred these distortion data over to this plate. Now if we press F5 and press Alt C to solve again with our distortion, we can start getting a little better lineup. So what we'll also do is do one more parameter adjustment with our distortion. Click adjust, and it's brought it around an 18mm. We'll just do one more. Just Alt C. And we're only assuming that these are absolutely accurate. So we're going to get a high deviation for our lineup because we're assuming that this is exactly correct, but we've used them to get a pretty accurate focal length. So what we'll do, if we store the pose, if we select all our points, then right click, modify, survey, and survey free them. Then you want to go to edit, project points on 3D models. Just keep projecting them until they all project. Press Alt C, and now we've locked that into position. If we lose our pose, we still have these lineup points to save us. So now if we right click, add new point set, so you need to right click in your point browser, press SF, and we click OK. We can select all these, click and drag them under the single frame. Then now we want, because we're done with these, but this is kind of our safety net. So if we go view, hide selected points, make sure you have to disable these, otherwise they'll completely destroy your solve. So right click, modify, calculation, and disabled. So now they should say off. So now what we'll do, we want to start tracking the shot. So if we press F2, we can start making tracking markers. So I'll start on frame 1. So if I press Control left click, gauge marker and track, you can see it sort of flying around because I need to be on center 2D. So now I can see that it's sticking to that point. And I'll just go through, track all these points. Some of these points will go off, so you need to make sure that you end your points before they go off, otherwise they'll completely break your solve. This little point down here. So it's stopped 1 frame to the end, so what we'll do, we'll just go back a couple frames, adjust our box, click track, and now it's tracked all the way into the corner. So we can do the rest for these. Gauge marker and track. You can see it's sort of spinning around. It should be okay. So control left click. And we can actually just get this section up here. So now we go from the last frame, we'll pick up some of these points that we haven't tracked. And we need to make sure that we end that point before it starts going crazy. Let's pick up this point here as well. Just make sure you always end them before, because otherwise they'll just do that, just float around. And they'll ruin your solve. So just click. And let's get this last bit here. Gauge marker track. Just pull that back. An endpoint. So now if we press F5. We want to go to this red keyframe where our single frame lineup is. And now we can project our points. So if you hold Alt and left click, you can go to edit, project points on 3D models. And 2 or 3 of them projected. So if we zoom in, edit, project, and now let's project it onto there. And we'll do the same for these 3 over here. Select all of those, edit, project points. Only one of them, so if we'll zoom in, 2 or 3, then we'll do one more, edit. So we don't want to project this one, because if we project this one, this is going to project onto this back wall, and it's going to completely break everything. But we can project this one. Click OK. So now we do, if we press Alt-C to solve, use result. If we scrub for a timeline, we'll see everything's tracking pretty well, but we've got some sort of dipping in our deviation browser. So if we go to our deviation browser here, go show point deviation curves and active points only, we can sort of see all these little lines are our tracking points. Our green is our average and our blue are our tracking points. So we can see this one here is straight away causing us problems. So if we right click on that, survey, and survey free it for now, and hold Alt-C, and that hasn't really changed that much. So what we'll do, we'll go to our parameter adjustment window, we'll just adjust our parameters, we'll transfer parameters, press Alt-C, we seem to have lost our line up here, so we'll actually go to our lens. We'll go back to 18mm and resolve that. So we're going to stick with 18mm because it's lining up really well here. So what we'll also do, we'll go to our distortion, we'll do a slight distortion adjustment. So if we go to distortion here, select adjust, and go to our parameter window. We need to make sure we turn off focal length and change this to adaptive. If you clear that, select adjust. You see it's slightly adjusted it. And we can adjust again. And if we press Alt-C and see what that does, let's change it a little bit. So if we go to our quartic distortion and select that, turn off our distortion and make sure only our quartic's enabled. Select adaptive, click adjust, transfer the parameters, Alt-C again. So if we scrub for our timeline, if we right click on this, it might be just our tracking point's not very good. So if we calculation, disable it, press Alt C, and it was probably just a very bad tracking point as well. So although it looks like we've got quite a big curve here, if you look at these values, because it sort of averages out, so it will say like that looks bad, but in reality, if you look at these values, they're extremely low because this is the average curve of all our points. So that's actually fine. So if we press play, we can full frame it, and we can see that our background's working really well and all our foreground's working. So now we're done with the camera for this. So if we go to 3D4 and click save, and I'll just overwrite that one, we're done with this. So our next thing would be we need to track our face and bring in our geo for our head. So first of all, we'll go to our point groups at the top left, right click and add new, and select point group, and that will make a new point group in our point groups, and it will automatically change to object. So if we double click on that, we'll now be in our active object group. So now what we can do, we can open this up, go to 3D models, right click, import OBJ file, and if we go to our set geo, you have your head. Then in here you have hunter head low res or hunter head scan. So what we'll do, we'll bring in our low res and see what that looks like. What we can center our models. Can't see it because we've got this geometry still here from our first point group. So we open it up, we can select it, select show, and now we can see that we've got a head here. So if we select our head, we can hold shift and right click and bring it in, a middle mouse button to translate it up. So we can do the same as we did with the camera, using just our shift control to make a rough lineup. And you should be able to get a pretty good rough lineup straight away. So we'll go to F2, and we'll just, like we did with the camera, we'll pick a good lineup frame where we can see the most. And let's pick the first frame actually. So if we go F5, hold shift, and we'll just do a quick lineup to our first frame. And we can see we can get it pretty close straight away. So if we select extract vertex, hold control, and we can left click and we can move everything around with these lineup points. And we'll just do this around the face so we can pull it in to be a little bit tighter. So if we select extract vertex, hold control, left click, pull his nose in, and make sure you press Alt left click to deselect everything, then extract vertex. And you might get some funny things happen. So if we hold shift and left click round, just bring it back. Let's just store our pose just in case it happens again. Then we'll extract vertex, hold control and left click, and put one on the chin to sort of stabilize it. So now we'll just pull these lineup points around, try and get a pretty good lineup. Obviously, his face moves, so we've only got a static OBJ here, so it's kind of what we have to do is get best fit. But you should be able to get it very close. So I'm going to mainly focus on getting the face correct. His hat should be fine, but we can assume that maybe his hat may have been slightly adjusted between shots or something. And that his neck's probably not. This model's got a perfectly straight neck, so let's assume that his neck's not perfectly straight upwards. He might tilted slightly. So we can go around, we can get these eyes pretty close, and the mouth. It's all looking pretty tight. And I'm not too, like I said, I always go for the majority of the fit. Say if all this is looking really nice around here, we can see his jawline's fitting really well, but then his ear is slightly off. We can assume that's probably the ears and the model's not 100% correct, or the hat's been adjusted. So we want to try and get the larger percentage of the model fitting as best as possible. So just using these line-up points to sort of bring it around. So let's see what happens if we pull this around a little bit. I think that's pretty close. So if we store our pose, now we can go to F2, and we can actually start tracking some of these points. So hold Control left click, pick some of these points, and we can track it. And we'll just go through and we'll track as many of these points as we can. Through Control left click to create a tracking point. Engage marker and track. So we've actually tracked all our tracking markers, but we can use features of the face. So we want to try and pick places that are not going to be moving. So maybe around the eyebrows, maybe moving. So let's pick points on the nose. Engage marker and track. See, that's not a very good track, so we can actually pick this bit here, engage marker and track. Luckily he doesn't move his mouth that much, so we can select this point here. We can pick some points in the hat as well. Just be aware that if we project this, they may not project in the correct place. Gauge marker track. So let's have a look, see if he moves much of his eyebrows. So although we don't see it, he does blink. So his eyebrows probably do slightly move. We can get rid of this crosshair if it gets annoying. We'll go view, turn off FOV. So let's try and get, there is another tracking mark here, but we can't quite see it. So let's actually see what happens if we track some of this eyebrow. Gauge marker and track. We can sort of see it shifts around. We'll just track something over here for. Cool, so if we select all our points and just check that we've got a fairly good spread of points, I think we have. So if we press F5, and what we can do is select all our points and go edit, project points onto 3D model, and it's projected 10 of 10. So now if we press Alt-C and solve for our animation, select use result. If we press spacebar, we can full frame this. You can see our deviation is really good. And with object tracks, your lineup is really important. It will make the difference between having quite a nice deviation and a really good animation. But if you kind of skimp out on the lineup, it will give you a little bit of problems. but that's the same with cameras anyway. So we can just play through this and just look at it. And just check, we can go on center 3D. And we can see that's pretty much sticking, and that's pretty much perfect. So we can full frame that. So we're pretty much done with this shot now. We've done our camera track, so if we just go to our first point group, select our model. We can change the color of it, just so we can differentiate between the two. Press spacebar. So we've completed our camera track, and now we've done our object track. So now we need to export our camera, and if we select 3DE4, export project, select Maya, and we'll change our start frame to 1001, and we'll make sure we don't export. In fact, let's make sure we don't select that, because we don't want to export our set geo as well, because we already have that. So if we export file, if we go to our folder, and we'll call this Hunter H002. We select OK, export that. Then we need to export out our lens distortion. So we go File, Export, Nuke 3D4 Lens Distortion node, file name, and we'll do the same again. Nuke LD node, CO1, click OK. And we also need to export out our geometry for our head, for our lineup. So if we go back to our first frame, and we go to F6, and we can select, if we go to our point group 2 and select our hunter head, and go to 3D models, and export 3D model as OBJ. Browse, and I'll call this hunter head SFLUP for a single frame lineup. VO1. Click OK. And that'll export out our head at that position. So now finally we need to export out our undistorted plate so we can work in Maya. So if we go to 3DE4, run warp 4, and you should have this window open up. So now what we want to do is go to our destination footage, select save footage, click browse, and we can go to our destination folder, and we want to make a new directory so we don't fill up our previous directory with images. So I'll call it UDP for undistorted plate, and I'll call it hunter I'll put UDP so I know it's an undistorted plate dot 4 hashes dot EXL, and I'll click OK. What I'll do, I'll change the scale to 50% so I get a lower res image sequence in Maya so it's not so laggy. Then I'll click render. So this is quite a short image sequence, so it's going quite quickly, and it's at 2K. So now we'll just go to File, Exit, and now we're done in 3DEqualizer. Our next step would be to go into Maya, sort out our camera, and prepare our animation on our head. And yeah, we're pretty much done. Then you can say add your beard or do some makeup to him or something, or whatever you want to do. So if you guys enjoyed this tutorial, hit that like button and subscribe for more like this.